Black boy helps millionaire fix a flat tire, but what happens next is unbelievable. On a quiet road, under the golden hues of sunset, a young boy with dirt on his hands, but purity in his heart, crosses paths with a powerful man, weighed down by the urgency of his own world. What begins as a simple act of kindness, fixing a flat tire, unfolds into something far greater, something neither of them could have imagined. How can one small act of generosity change not just a life, but an entire destiny? This is another beautiful story from Living Narratives, where you feel the true emotion of stories that make you reflect on life. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from, and join us on this heartfelt journey. The encounter on the road. The deep hum of a car engine breaking the silence of the deserted road caught Samuel's attention. He stopped, his heart pounding faster than usual. Ahead of him, not far away, a luxury car stood on the shoulder, one of its tires visibly damaged. Beside it, a well-dressed man paced back and forth, gesturing in frustration. Samuel took a deep breath. He was only 14 years old, but his curiosity and sense of responsibility urged him to approach. With cautious steps, he closed the distance, taking in every detail: the metallic sheen of the car, the man's hands holding a phone, likely seeking help that hadn't arrived. "Sir, do you need help?" Samuel's voice was steady, though tinged with shyness. The man, whose name he would later learn was David, turned sharply, as though not expecting to hear another voice on that deserted road. He observed Samuel for a moment, as if assessing an unexpected situation. The contrast between them was stark. Samuel, with his simple clothes and hands already dirtied from his walk. David, immaculate, save for the visible frustration on his face. "Do you know how to change a tire?" The question was almost a challenge, delivered with a tone of skepticism that might have deterred anyone else, but not Samuel. "I can try," he replied with a timid smile that disarmed some of David's resistance. The process was far from easy. The jack was stuck, the lug nuts wouldn't budge, and the heat of the evening sun made sweat drip down Samuel's face. Even so, he persisted. With each failed attempt, he would step back, take a deep breath, and try again. David, for his part, watched silently, his eyes revealing a mix of surprise and discomfort. Finally, with one last turn, the tire gave way. Samuel wiped his hands on his pants, his face lit up with a triumphant smile. "It's done!" David opened his wallet and pulled out some bills, extending them towards Samuel. "Here, for the effort." The response came without hesitation. "No, sir, I just wanted to help." David stood still for a moment, his arms still outstretched, as Samuel's words echoed in his mind. Something about that refusal unsettled him. He slowly lowered his hand, watching the boy walk away with light steps, as if nothing extraordinary had happened. Samuel continued his walk, his heart light, unaware that he had planted a seed during that encounter. Behind him, David got into his car, but before starting the engine, he glanced into the rearview mirror, his thoughts filled with questions he didn't yet know how to answer. The sun, now almost hidden on the horizon, painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, as if preserving the moment in its colors. Little did they know that encounter was only the beginning of something far greater. Samuel's life. The familiar sound of the creaking front door greeted Samuel as he stepped into the modest house he called home. His footsteps echoed softly against the worn wooden floor, a testament to the years of love and sacrifice that held the small structure together. Inside, the aroma of simmering beans wafted from the kitchen, mingling with the faint hum of an old radio playing a classic tune. "Samuel, is that you?" called a warm yet weary voice from the kitchen. "Yes, Mama," he replied, his tone gentle, but his mind still replaying the events of the evening. The man, the car, the act of helping someone so different from him. Maria appeared in the doorway, her hands dusted with flour and her apron worn from countless meals prepared with care. Her face, though marked by the trials of life, carried a serenity that made Samuel's heart ache with gratitude. She was his anchor, the force that kept their little family afloat through the tides of hardship. "You're late today," she said, her brows furrowing slightly. "Were you out helping someone again?" A faint smile played on Samuel's lips. He sat down at the kitchen table, his hands tracing the wood's uneven surface. There was a man on the road. His car had a flat tire. Maria paused, her hands resting on the back of a chair as she studied her son's face. "And you helped him, didn't you?" Samuel nodded. "He seemed different, Mama, like he wasn't used to people helping him without wanting something in return." Maria let out a soft sigh and sat across from him. "Not everyone is, Samuel, but that doesn't mean you should change who you are." Her words settled over him like a comforting blanket, a reminder of the values she had worked so hard to instill. Maria had always taught him to act with kindness, not for recognition, but because it was simply the right thing to do. As they ate their modest dinner, Samuel recounted the encounter in greater detail. David's initial reluctance, his surprise, and the moment he had refused the money. Maria listened intently, her eyes glistening with a mixture of pride and concern. "You have a good heart, my son," she said softly, her hand resting briefly over his. "But sometimes the world doesn't know what to do with goodness like yours." Later that night, as Samuel lay on his small cot, the ceiling above him illuminated by the faint glow of moonlight, he thought about Maria's words. He had never seen kindness as something extraordinary, just something natural. Yet the look on David's face when he refused the money lingered in his mind. It wasn't just surprise, it was something deeper, something that felt like a spark waiting to ignite. Outside, the wind rustled through the trees, carrying with it the whispers of a world much larger than the one Samuel knew. A part of him wondered what lay beyond the boundaries of their humble home, beyond the struggles they faced every day. But for now, the steady rhythm of his mother's voice humming a lullaby in the next room grounded him, reminding him of what truly mattered. Unbeknownst to Samuel, the events of that day were already setting into motion a chain of changes that would alter their lives forever. As his eyes closed, his dreams were filled with flashes of things he couldn't yet understand. A shiny car pulling up outside, Maria's smile mixed with disbelief, and a man's voice saying, "This is just the beginning." And indeed it was. The road Samuel walked was about to lead him to places he never imagined, carrying with it the lessons of kindness, humility, and the quiet strength his mother had instilled in him. The arrival of the black SUV. The early morning sun crept through the thin curtains of Samuel's small bedroom, casting streaks of golden light across the humble space. He stirred awake to the distant sound of an engine, its low, powerful hum unlike any he had heard in their quiet neighborhood. As the sound grew louder, it was followed by the crunch of gravel under tires, coming to a halt just outside their modest home. Samuel sat up, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. His heart skipped a beat when he peeked through the window. A sleek black SUV, polished to perfection, stood on the dirt path in front of their house. Its imposing presence looked entirely out of place among the weathered homes and dusty streets of the community. "Mama!" he called, his voice tinged with urgency. Maria appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "What is it, Samuel?" "Look," he said, pointing toward the window. Her eyes widened as she took in the sight of the luxurious vehicle. Before she could utter a word, the driver's side door opened, and out stepped a familiar figure, David. He was dressed as impeccably as the day before, but now there was something different about his demeanor. He wasn't the flustered, impatient man Samuel had met on the road. This time he carried himself with purpose, his expression soft yet resolute. Maria's brows furrowed with concern. "Who is that man, Samuel?" "He's the one I helped yesterday," Samuel replied. "I don't know why he's here." Before either of them could speculate further, there was a firm knock at the door. Maria hesitated, glancing at her son. "Stay here," she said, her voice steady but cautious, before making her way to the door. When she opened it, David stood there, a faint smile playing on his lips. "Good morning," he began, his voice polite yet commanding. "I hope I'm not intruding. I wanted to see Samuel." Maria crossed her arms, her protective instincts kicking in. "What for?" David hesitated, his gaze flickering between Maria and the small, curious face peeking out from behind her. "I wanted to thank him properly for what he did yesterday. He didn't have to help me, but he did. And it meant more than I realized at the time." Maria studied him for a moment, her expression unreadable. Then, stepping aside, she gestured for him to enter. "Come in." David stepped into the humble home, his polished shoes seeming almost out of place against the worn floorboards. He carried a neatly wrapped box in one hand, its glossy surface catching the light. He handed it to Maria with a nod of respect. "This is for you both," he said, his tone earnest. "It's just a token of appreciation." Maria accepted the box, reluctantly, setting it on the table without opening it. "You didn't have to do this," she said. "I know," David replied, his eyes now focused on Samuel. "But sometimes you meet someone who reminds you of what really matters. Samuel, you helped me without expecting anything in return. People like you are rare." Samuel shifted uncomfortably under David's gaze, unsure of how to respond. David continued, "I'd like to invite you both to my home. I want to get to know you better, and if you'll allow me, I'd like to help in any way I can." Maria's eyes narrowed slightly. "Help? What kind of help?" "I don't mean to overstep," David said quickly, sensing her apprehension. "But I believe that kindness like Samuel's deserves to be recognized. And if there's anything I can do to make your lives a little easier, I'd like to try." Samuel looked at his mother, his eyes wide with a mixture of excitement and uncertainty. Maria's lips pressed into a thin line as she weighed the offer. This was a man from an entirely different world, stepping into theirs with promises that felt almost too good to be true. "We'll think about it," she said finally, her voice firm. David nodded, a faint smile, returning to his face. "That's all I ask. Thank you for letting me visit." As he turned to leave, he glanced back at Samuel. "You've already changed one life, Samuel. Don't ever underestimate what you're capable of." With that, he stepped out the door, leaving Maria and Samuel standing in thoughtful silence. The black SUV pulled away, its powerful engine fading into the distance. Maria opened the box David had left, revealing a collection of fresh groceries, a small envelope of cash, and a handwritten note that simply read, "Thank you for reminding me what truly matters." The gesture left them, both conflicted, grateful but cautious. As Maria placed the lid back on the box, she looked at her son. "Be careful with people like him, Samuel. They can change your life, but not always in the way you expect." Samuel nodded, but a part of him couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of something far bigger than either of them could imagine. A world of luxury. The crunch of gravel beneath their feet felt foreign as Samuel and Maria walked up the grand stone driveway. The sprawling mansion before them loomed large, its walls gleaming under the midday sun. Samuel's eyes widened as he took in the manicured gardens, the marble statues scattered across the lush lawns, and the fountain at the center of it all, its water cascading like a symphony of wealth. Maria's hand tightened around Samuel's as they reached the massive wooden door. "Remember, Samuel," she whispered, her voice steady despite the awe in her eyes. "We're here as guests. Don't let any of this make you forget who you are." Before Samuel could respond, the door opened, revealing David. He was dressed casually this time, a soft smile lighting up his face. "Welcome," he said warmly, stepping aside to let them in. The inside of the mansion was even more overwhelming than the outside. High ceilings adorned with crystal chandeliers, walls lined with artwork that seemed too valuable to touch, and floors so polished they reflected the light like a mirror. Every detail screamed of a life Samuel couldn't begin to fathom. "Come," David gestured, leading them into a sitting room where an array of refreshments awaited. "Please make yourselves comfortable." Maria hesitated for a moment before sitting on the edge of a plush armchair, her posture straight and guarded. Samuel, meanwhile, perched on the edge of the sofa, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. David poured tea into delicate porcelain cups and handed one to Maria. "I wanted to show you my world, not to overwhelm you, but to share something I've learned recently." He paused, his gaze settling on Samuel. "Your kindness reminded me of something I'd forgotten, a time when I didn't have. This," he gestured around him, "when all of this was just a dream." Samuel tilted his head, curiosity flickering in his eyes. "You didn't always have this?" David smiled wistfully. "No, I didn't. I grew up in a neighborhood not unlike yours. My mother worked tirelessly to give me opportunities, just as Maria does for you." Maria's posture softened slightly at his words, though her expression remained cautious. "If that's true, then you understand what it's like to fight for everything." David nodded. "I do. That's why I want to help. I believe in giving back, and I believe Samuel has the potential to achieve great things, things he may not even realize yet." Samuel looked down at his hands, his mind racing. The offer David had hinted at the day before was beginning to take shape, but it still felt surreal. "I'd like to sponsor your education, Samuel," David said gently. "A school that can open doors for you, give you opportunities that might otherwise take years to reach." Maria's eyes narrowed slightly. "And what do you expect in return?" David shook his head. "Nothing. This isn't a transaction. It's gratitude. Your son's act of kindness reminded me of what matters most. I want to honor that." Maria glanced at Samuel, who was staring at David with wide eyes. The weight of the moment pressed heavily on both of them. "We need time to think," Maria said finally, her voice firm. "This is a lot to take in." "Of course," David replied, his smile kind. "There's no rush. I just wanted you to know what I'm offering, and that I truly believe in Samuel." The visit continued with a tour of the mansion. Samuel walked silently, absorbing the grandeur around him. But his mind wasn't on the paintings or the luxurious furniture. It was on the possibility David had laid before him, a new school, a new path, a new life. As they left the mansion, David handed Maria a card with his contact information. "Call me when you're ready," he said. The drive home was quiet, the SUV's imposing presence fading into the distance as Samuel and Maria approached their small house. Maria placed the card on the table, her expression unreadable. "What do you think, Mama?" Samuel finally asked. Maria sighed, her gaze softening as she looked at her son. "I think he means well. But sometimes, Samuel, opportunities like this come with challenges we can't see right away." Samuel nodded, though his heart was already beginning to dream of what could be. The mansion, the school, the life David spoke of, it all felt like another world. But for the first time, it didn't feel entirely out of reach. As the evening settled in and the familiar comfort of home wrapped around them, Samuel found himself staring at the card on the table, a quiet resolve forming within him. Whatever lay ahead, he would face it with the same determination that had led him to help a stranger on the side of the road. The tempting offer. The air in their small kitchen felt heavier than usual as Maria sat across from Samuel, the small white card David had given them resting on the table like an unspoken challenge. The hum of the old fridge filled the silence between them, but neither spoke. Finally, Maria broke the quiet. "Samuel, this isn't a decision we can take lightly." Her tone was firm, but there was a softness in her eyes that betrayed her concern. "I know, Mama," Samuel replied, his voice steady but thoughtful. "But what if this is a chance for us? For me?" Maria leaned back in her chair, letting out a deep sigh. "A chance, yes, but chances like these come with strings we can't always see." Samuel stared at the card, his mind swirling with possibilities. He had always dreamed of something more, not just for himself, but for his mother, who had sacrificed so much to give him the little they had. The offer David had made felt like the first real opportunity to make that dream a reality. "I don't think he wants anything in return, Mama," Samuel said cautiously. He seemed genuine." Maria studied her son's face, her heart heavy with the weight of her own doubts. She had spent her life shielding Samuel from the world's harsh realities, but this was different. This wasn't a danger she could see or predict. It was an unknown path, both promising and perilous. After a long pause, Maria nodded. "All right, let's call him. But Samuel, if we do this, we'll do it on our terms. We won't let anyone take advantage of us." Samuel's face lit up with a mixture of relief and excitement. "Thank you, Mama. I promise. I'll make you proud." That evening, Maria dialed the number on the card, her hand trembling slightly as she held the phone to her ear. David's voice came through almost immediately, warm and composed. "Maria," he said, his tone respectful, "I wasn't sure if I'd hear from you so soon." "We've decided to hear you out," Maria replied, her voice firm. "But we need to know exactly what you're offering and what you expect in return." David assured her once again that his intentions were purely to help. He explained that he had connections with a prestigious private school nearby, a place that could offer Samuel not just an education, but opportunities to build a future that might otherwise be out of reach. "I don't expect anything in return," David said earnestly, "but I do believe in giving back. Samuel reminded me of the kindness I received when I needed it most. This is my way of honoring that." Maria listened carefully, her skepticism giving way to cautious optimism. After agreeing to meet again to discuss the details, she hung up and turned to Samuel. "He's serious," she said, her voice tinged with both surprise and uncertainty. "But this won't be easy, Samuel. That kind of school, it's a different world. You'll have to work harder than ever." "I'll do whatever it takes," Samuel said, without hesitation. A week later, David arrived at their home. Once more, this time with papers in hand. He explained the scholarship he had arranged, covering all of Samuel's expenses. He also included a modest monthly stipend for Maria, a gesture that left her both grateful and uneasy. As Samuel listened to the details, a flicker of doubt crossed his mind. It wasn't about David's intentions. He believed those were genuine, but about what accepting this offer might mean for his identity, his roots, and his connection to the community he loved. "I need some time to think," Samuel said finally, his voice quiet but resolute. David nodded, a look of admiration crossing his face. "Take all the time you need, Samuel. This is your decision, and it's an important one." That night, Samuel walked through the neighborhood, his footsteps slow and deliberate. He passed familiar faces, friends and neighbors who had always supported him in small but meaningful ways. The thought of leaving them, even temporarily, weighed heavily on his heart. But he also thought about the possibilities, the education, the future, the chance to give back in ways he never could from where he was. The decision wasn't just about him anymore. It was about everyone who had ever believed in him, everyone who had shaped the person he was becoming. By the time he returned home, the resolve in his heart had solidified. He didn't have all the answers yet, but he knew one thing for certain. Whatever he decided, it would be with integrity and the values his mother had taught him. As he lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, Samuel whispered softly to himself, "I'll make it worth it, for all of us." The air was filled with the familiar sounds of children's laughter and the steady rhythm of footsteps on dusty paths. Samuel walked through his neighborhood with a thoughtful expression, his hands tucked into the pockets of his well-worn jeans. Each house he passed carried its own story. Families who worked tirelessly to make ends meet, neighbors who lent a helping hand in times of need, and friends who had grown up with him in this tight-knit community. He stopped near a small, open field where a group of children played a game of soccer. The ball, scuffed and patched in places, moved quickly between eager feet. One of the boys, Carlos, noticed Samuel and waved him over. "Samuel, come play!" Carlos called, his grin wide and inviting. Samuel smiled but shook his head. "Not today, Carlos. Just passing by." Carlos jogged over, his expression shifting to one of concern. "You've been quiet. Lately, what's going on?" Samuel hesitated. He hadn't told anyone about David's offer yet. The weight of the decision felt too personal, too delicate to share. But as Carlos's curious eyes bore into him, Samuel realized he couldn't carry this alone. "There's this man I met," Samuel began, his voice steady but cautious. "He wants to help me. A scholarship, a better school." Carlos's eyes widened in surprise. "That's amazing. What's stopping you?" Samuel glanced toward the field, watching as the children cheered for a goal. "It's not just about me," he said quietly. "If I take this, I leave all of you behind. And what about Mama? What if I can't handle it?" Carlos placed a reassuring hand on Samuel's shoulder. "You've always been the one to help everyone else. Maybe this time you need to let someone help you. Besides, if anyone can handle this, it's you." Samuel nodded, though the uncertainty still lingered. As he walked away, Carlos's words echoed in his mind. His next stop was the small community center where his mother volunteered during her spare time. The building, though worn with age, served as a beacon of hope for the neighborhood. Inside, Maria was organizing a pile of donated clothing, her movements methodical and purposeful. "Mama," Samuel called softly, stepping inside. Maria looked up, her face lighting up with a smile. "What brings you here, mio figlio?" "I just needed to think," he replied, sitting on a nearby bench. "I talked to Carlos, told him David's offer." Maria stopped her work and sat beside him. "And what did he say?" "He thinks I should take it, that I shouldn't be afraid to let someone help me." Maria's expression softened, and she placed a hand on his knee. "Carlos is right, you know. But this isn't a simple decision, Samuel. It's about more than just accepting help. It's about what you'll do with it." Samuel looked at her, his brow furrowed in thought. "I've been thinking, if I take this chance, maybe I can do more than just help us. Maybe I can find a way to give back to everyone here." Maria's eyes glistened with pride. "That's your heart speaking, Samuel. And whatever you decide, I know it will be the right choice." As the sun began to set, Samuel found himself back on the path toward home. The golden hues of the sky mirrored the sense of hope and uncertainty within him. His steps were slow but deliberate, his mind racing with possibilities. By the time he reached their small house, he felt a newfound determination. This wasn't just an opportunity for him, it was a chance to make a difference for everyone who had ever supported him, believed in him, and shaped the person he was. Samuel opened the door to find Maria setting the table for dinner. The scent of freshly cooked rice and beans filled the air, a comforting reminder of the life they had built together. "I've made my decision," he said, his voice steady. Maria turned to him, her hands still holding a plate. "And?" Samuel took a deep breath. "I'll accept David's offer, but only if part of it goes toward helping the community. I want to make sure this chance isn't just about me. It's about all of us." Maria's face broke into a proud smile, and she nodded. "That's my boy, always thinking of others." That night, as Samuel prepared for bed, he felt a strange mix of excitement and apprehension. The road ahead would be challenging, but he was ready. For his mother, his friends, his community, for all of them, he would face whatever came next with courage and determination. Next morning, Samuel and Maria sat across from David in his spacious living room. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting a warm glow over the polished wood floors and the elegant furniture that felt worlds away from their modest home. The tension in the air was palpable. As Samuel finally voiced the decision he had made, "I'll accept your offer," Samuel began, his voice steady but firm. "But I have one condition." David arched an eyebrow, intrigued. "Go on." "I want part of this help to go to my community. Not just me. There are others like me, families like mine, who need opportunities too." David's expression softened, and a small smile tugged at the corners of his lips. "You remind me so much of someone I once knew," he said, leaning back in his chair. "I think it's time I told you a bit about myself." Maria exchanged a cautious glance with Samuel, but neither interrupted as David began his story. "I wasn't born into this life of luxury," he said, his tone quieter now, tinged with nostalgia. "In fact, I grew up in a neighborhood much like yours. My mother worked tirelessly to keep us afloat. She was strong, resilient, and taught me the value of hard work. But no matter how hard we tried, life always seemed one step ahead of us." David paused, his gaze distant, as though he were looking through the years. "One day, when I was about your age, Samuel, someone reached out to me. A man I barely knew saw potential in me. He gave me a chance, an education, connections, a way out of the cycle we were trapped in. But he didn't just help me. He taught me the importance of paying it forward. That's why I'm here today." Maria's posture softened as she listened, her protective skepticism giving way to understanding. "So," David continued, his eyes locking, "with Samuel's, when I met you on that road, refusing money for something as selfless as helping a stranger, it reminded me of myself at your age. And I knew I couldn't just walk away. I had to do something." Samuel absorbed David's words in silence, the weight of them settling heavily on his young shoulders. "Do you ever regret it?" Samuel asked after a moment. "Taking the help, I mean." David smiled faintly, shaking his head. "Not for a second. But it wasn't easy. There were challenges, feeling out of place, questioning whether I deserved it. But every step I took reminded me why I had to keep going. And now I want to do the same for you." Maria leaned forward, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "You've been where we are," she said softly. "You understand what this means to us. But I need you to promise me something, David." David's expression grew serious. "Anything. Promise me that this won't change who my son is. I've worked too hard to raise him right. He doesn't need to be molded into someone else. He just needs a chance to be the best version of himself." David nodded solemnly. "You have my word, Maria. I'm not here to change Samuel. I'm here to support him, to help him grow into the person he's meant to be." The room fell quiet as the weight of the moment settled over them. For Samuel, it felt like a bridge was being built between two worlds, one he was familiar with and one he was just beginning to glimpse. David stood, signaling the end of their meeting. "Take the weekend to think everything over," he said. "We'll start when you're ready." As they left the mansion, Samuel couldn't shake the feeling that he was walking towards something far greater than he could comprehend. His mind replayed David's story, the parallels between their lives weaving a thread of connection that felt both comforting and daunting. That evening, as Maria prepared dinner, Samuel sat at the kitchen table deep in thought. "Mama," he said suddenly, breaking the silence. "Yes, mio figlio," Maria replied without looking up from the stove. "Do you think I can really do this? Be like him?" Maria turned to face him, her eyes warm but serious. "You don't have to be like him, Samuel. You just have to be you. That's more than enough." Her words settled over him like a blanket, soothing the doubts that had begun to creep into his mind. Later that night, as Samuel lay in bed, he thought about David's promise, his mother's faith in him, and the community he loved. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing for certain. He would face it with the strength, kindness, and determination that had brought him this far, and with every step he would carry his family, his neighbors, and his past with him, as a reminder of where he came from and the path he was forging ahead. The difficult decision, the small, worn card, sat on the table between Samuel and Maria, as if it held the weight of the world. Outside, the quiet hum of the neighborhood filled the air, but inside the house, the silence was thick with unspoken questions. Samuel looked at his mother, searching her face for reassurance. "Mama, this feels big, bigger than me." Maria placed her hand over his, her touch warm and grounding. "It is big, Samuel, but it's also your opportunity. You don't have to decide alone, but the choice has to come from your heart." Samuel nodded, his thoughts racing. He had spent the past few days weighing everything: David's offer, the challenges it might bring, and the dreams he'd held on to for so long. He had spoken to Carlos and a few trusted neighbors, each of them encouraging him to take the chance. Yet, he couldn't ignore the quiet voice in his mind that questioned whether he was ready. Later that evening, Samuel stepped outside, the cool night air brushing against his skin. He walked aimlessly, his feet carrying him to the edge of the community where the streetlights grew sparse and the stars shone brighter. It was here, on the outskirts of familiarity, that he felt the pull of both fear and hope. David's words lingered in his mind. "You've already changed one life, Samuel. Don't underestimate what you're capable of." But what if he failed? What if stepping into David's world meant losing himself in the process? As he stood in the quiet, the sound of footsteps drew his attention. He turned to see Maria approaching, a shawl draped over her shoulders to guard against the chill. She stopped beside him, her gaze fixed on the same horizon he was contemplating. "You're thinking about the risks," she said softly. Samuel nodded. "What if I let it down? What if I can't handle it?" Maria turned to face him, her expression a mixture of pride and determination. "Samuel, do you know why I believe in you? It's not just because you're my son. It's because you've already shown me the kind of man you're becoming. Strong, kind, selfless. Those things don't come from where you live or the opportunities you're given. They come from here." She placed her hand over his heart. Her words wrapped around him like a shield, pushing back the doubts that had threatened to consume him. The next morning, Samuel made his decision. He and Maria sat across from David once again, the cards still on the table, but this time the atmosphere was charged with resolve. "I'll do it," Samuel said, his voice steady. "But I need this to mean something more than just a better life for me. I want to use this chance to help my community too. That's my condition." David's face broke into a smile, his admiration for Samuel evident. "I wouldn't expect anything less from you." Over the next few days, preparations began. Samuel would start school in a week, and David arranged for him to visit the campus. Maria, though proud, remained cautiously watchful, ensuring every step of the process aligned with their values. The night before Samuel's first day, the community gathered in a small, impromptu celebration. Friends and neighbors brought food, shared stories, and showered Samuel with encouragement. Carlos raised a glass of soda, grinning. To Samuel, "Don't forget us when you're running the world." Laughter rippled through the crowd, but Samuel felt the sincerity beneath it. These were his people, and their belief in him fueled his resolve. When the gathering ended, Samuel stood outside with Maria, looking up at the stars. "Mama," he said quietly, "I'm scared, but I'm ready." Maria wrapped an arm around him, pulling him close. "Being scared means you understand how important this is, and being ready means you've already chosen to face it. You're going to make us proud, Samuel. I know it." As Samuel went to bed that night, his mind was filled with images of the future, a world of new challenges, opportunities, and unknowns. But beneath it all was a steady, unwavering hope that he could take this chance and turn it into something greater than himself. He wasn't just walking into a new chapter of his life. He was walking into a story that could change everything. The transformation begins. The first day at the new school felt like stepping into an entirely different universe. The gates of the private academy towered over Samuel, intricately designed with golden accents that shimmered in the morning sun. Beyond them stretched a campus that looked more like a museum than a school. Pristine lawns, towering buildings of polished stone, and students in neatly pressed uniforms that seemed worlds away from the clothes Samuel wore. He clutched his simple backpack tightly as he took a deep breath and stepped inside. David had dropped him off earlier, offering words of encouragement that now echoed faintly in his mind. "You belong here as much as anyone else." Samuel wasn't sure he believed that yet. Walking through the halls, He couldn't help but feel the weight of curious stares. The other students moved in small groups, their laughter and conversations flowing easily. Samuel felt like an outsider, every step a reminder of the gulf between his world and theirs. "Hey!" came a voice from behind him. Samuel turned to see a boy about his age, dressed in the same uniform but with an easy smile that put him slightly at ease. "You're the new guy, right? Samuel, isn't it?" "Yeah," Samuel replied cautiously. "I'm Eric," the boy said, extending a hand. "Welcome to the circus. It's not as bad as it looks once you get used to it." Samuel shook his hand, a small smile breaking through his nerves. "Thanks." Throughout the day, Samuel navigated his classes, trying to absorb everything while feeling the constant undercurrent of being different. The teachers were strict but fair, and the students, while polite, kept their distance, their curiosity evident in the glances they threw his way. At lunch, Samuel found himself sitting alone under a tree, near the edge of the campus. The weight of the day pressed on him, but the quiet gave him a chance to reflect. He thought about his neighborhood, about Maria, and the people who believed in him. This wasn't just about him. It was about proving that someone like him could thrive in a place like this. The sound of footsteps pulled him from his thoughts. Eric appeared, holding a tray of food. "Mind if I sit?" Eric asked, not waiting for a reply before plopping down beside him. Samuel chuckled softly. "Go ahead." For the first time that day, Samuel felt a sense of ease. Eric chatted freely, asking about Samuel's background, without a hint of judgment. In return, Samuel learned that Eric wasn't as different as he'd assumed. His family had struggled too, and Eric had earned his place at the academy through hard work and scholarships. "You'll be fine here," Eric said, finishing his sandwich. "People might stare for a while, but once they see who you are, they'll come around. Just be yourself." Samuel nodded, Eric's words resonating deeply. Over the next few weeks, Samuel began to settle into his new environment. He studied harder than he ever had, determined not to waste the opportunity he'd been given. The gaps between him and his classmates began to close, and though he still felt like an outsider at times, he found strength in his roots. David remained a steady presence, checking in on Samuel regularly and offering guidance when needed, but it was Maria's phone calls in the evenings that grounded him the most. "How was your day, mio figlio?" she would ask, her voice filled with warmth. "Busy," Samuel would reply, often sharing small victories, a good grade, a friendly conversation, or mastering a difficult lesson. Maria always ended the calls with the same words. "Remember who you are, Samuel. That's what will guide you." As time passed, Samuel's confidence grew. He began to see that he wasn't just surviving in this new world. He was thriving. He joined a study group, made friends, and even volunteered to help organize a school event, drawing on the sense of community he'd learned at home. But he never forgot where he came from. On weekends, Samuel returned to his neighborhood, spending time with Maria and the friends who had always supported him. He shared his experiences, listened to their challenges, and began to dream of ways to give back. One Saturday, Samuel visited the community center where Maria volunteered. He noticed the peeling paint, the worn furniture, and the limited resources. An idea began to form, a way to bridge the two worlds he now straddled. By the time he returned to school on Monday, Samuel's purpose was clearer than ever. This wasn't just about his education or his success. It was about creating opportunities for others, just as David had done for him. His transformation had begun, but Samuel knew this was only the first step in a much larger journey. The road ahead was long, but for the first time, he felt ready to walk it, not just for himself, but for everyone who believed in the power of kindness and determination. The true legacy years had passed, and the small neighborhood where Samuel had grown up was no longer the same. The dusty streets were now paved, the once-worn community center had been renovated, and new programs for education and vocational training had brought hope to countless families. In the heart of it all stood Samuel, now a young man, reflecting on the journey that had brought him here. The community center was buzzing with energy that day. Children laughed as they ran through the halls. Parents gathered to discuss plans for new initiatives, and volunteers bustled about, handing out supplies and organizing events. Samuel stood in the doorway, his heart full as he watched the life and vibrancy that had blossomed in the place that had shaped him. "Samuel!" a familiar voice called. He turned to see Carlos, now an adult, but with the same wide grin he'd had as a boy. "They're ready. And for you," Carlos said, gesturing toward a group of people gathered in the main hall. Samuel nodded, straightening his posture before walking in. As he entered, the crowd erupted into applause, their admiration for him evident in their eyes. Maria stood at the front, her face beaming with pride. She had aged, but her presence was as strong as ever. As Samuel approached, she pulled him into a tight embrace. "You did it, mio figlio," she whispered. "You've made a difference." Samuel smiled, his gaze sweeping over the room. "We did it, Mama. Together." As the applause quieted, Samuel stepped forward to address the crowd. "I stand here today because of this community," he began, his voice steady but emotional. "Because of the people who believed in me, who supported me, and who reminded me of the importance of giving back. This center is not just a building, it's a symbol of what we can achieve when we come together." He paused, his eyes landing on David, who stood near the back of the room, his expression proud but understated. David had been there every step of the way, not just as a benefactor, but as a mentor and friend. "I was once just a boy walking down a quiet road," Samuel continued, his voice growing stronger. "I didn't know then that a single act of kindness could set so much into motion, but that moment taught me something powerful, that our actions, no matter how small, can change lives." The room was silent, every face turned toward Samuel, hanging on his every word. "This isn't the end of the story," he said. "It's just the beginning. What we've built here is a foundation, a legacy that will continue to grow. And it's not about me, it's about all of us, about what we can do together." The crowd erupted into cheers, their energy filling the room with a sense of unity and hope. Later that evening, as the festivities wound down, Samuel found himself sitting on the steps of the community center, watching the stars. David joined him, the two men sitting in comfortable silence for a moment before David spoke. "You've done something incredible here, Samuel," David said. "Something I always hoped you would." Samuel turned to him, his expression thoughtful. "I couldn't have done it without you. You gave me a chance, believed in me when I didn't even believe in myself." David smiled, his gaze distant. "It's funny how life works, isn't it? I was given a chance once, just like you, and now, seeing what you've done, I realize that the true measure of success isn't what we achieve for ourselves, it's what we can give back." Samuel nodded, his heart swelling with gratitude and purpose. "I won't stop, David. There's so much more to do." David placed a hand on Samuel's shoulder. "I have no doubt." As the night deepened, Samuel reflected on how far he had come. From a boy on a quiet road to a young man leading a movement of change. The journey had been filled with challenges, but it had also been rich with lessons, growth, and the enduring power of kindness. He glanced toward the neighborhood, the lights from the homes glowing like stars scattered across the earth. This was his legacy, not just the buildings or the programs, but the lives he had touched and the hope he had helped ignite. And as he sat there under the vast expanse of the night sky, Samuel knew one thing for certain. The road ahead was still long, but he was ready to walk it, with his community, his family, and his unwavering belief in the power of a single act of kindness. What lesson did this touching story bring to you? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to know how it impacted your heart. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to give it a like and subscribe to Living Narratives. Every story we share is created with care and dedication, and your support helps us continue bringing more inspiring and heartfelt content like this. Explore other videos on the channel and join our community that believes in the power of stories to transform lives. Thank you so much for being here with us, and we'll see you next time.